Coming from the pod to record another episode of Off the Cuff. This week we're lucky enough to have Colin Bryce. Colin is a top-level sportsman, having participated in numerous Scottish Highland Games, powerlifting competitions, finalist in British Strongest Man, and having been a Winter Olympian in bobsleigh. Since retiring, he's done a range of commentary work, including Olympic commentary for both Eurosport and the BBC, as well as appearing on ITV's Ant and Dec's Saturday Night Takeaway. He's now a key figure within World's Strongest Man and runs Giants Live, bringing modern strongman to new heights in the UK. Welcome, Colin.
Way, thank you. That was a big build-up. Appreciate that.
It's all right. Can you tell us a bit about your career journey?
Well, it was very unconventional, I guess. I'm working with IMG Media, which is now Endeavour. I was very lucky to get a job with them, working in their television department while I was at university. I was planning on becoming a sports scientist. Not quite sure exactly what a sports scientist was going to do. But, I realised television was great fun, and I actually got to work on the production I still work on now. I did my 30th year. I'm only 50. I work on The World's Strongest Man and did then. And I've done just about every job in it. And I guess Giants Live, which is the business I started taking strongman to live audiences because it was so well known on television, but never been put into a pitch for the live. I started an equipment guy moving stuff on a beach in Mauritius for a month. I thought, this is cool. This is the way to be. I wanted to travel the world. I wanted to do interesting and exciting things. And that pretty much ticked every box. So I applied for a job at IMG and ended up in their post room, which wasn't exactly a thrilling start and a great end to my university career. And it took a while before I worked my way up to being a producer. I actually worked in news for a fair bit, working with Associated Press, the sports side of things, and bounced my way up through there. But I think I've always had a side to me that kind of knew I was best to start something on my own. And I began to look for entrepreneurial outings, as it were. And that was indeed putting on Highland Games. I once put on a Highland Games for 250 British Airways stewardesses. That was a rather amusing afternoon in North London. And then I realised that actually event producing was good fun, doing the commentary as well. You just grab every opportunity you can. And I just saw that there was a chance to get involved in an events company that was doing some strongman called Super Series. It's quite funny, really. I phoned the guy up. I was commentating his shows on Eurosport and got his name, the guy who was the producer and the owner of the tour. And I called him up and I said, hey, Ulf Benson, how are you doing, Ulf? This is Colin Bryce. I'm the guy who commentates your shows on Eurosport because they send them in without commentary. And I said, I really think you could improve your productions a lot. I also think your presenter's terrible. He clearly doesn't have a great command of English and he's chewing tobacco and he looks really out of shape. And he went, oh, really? Okay, you think you can do better then? And I went, yeah, I do. He went, well, that guy's me. And I said, oh, right. I didn't realize Ulf was also presenting his own strongman shows. But anyway, he was, come on in, smart guy. Come out and help me. And that was it. So I went and helped him and then began producing and it grew and it grew. And I really ran everything for him. He owned a huge series of gyms across Europe called World Class Gyms and kind of culminated in Madison Square Garden in 2008. And that was the first time in almost exactly 100 years strongman had been an item at Madison Square Garden. I really wanted to keep taking it bigger and better. And we were kind of at loggerheads. I think our journey together had run as far as it could go. So I looked around for seed money and started my own tour, basically. That's really how I kind of expanded into Giants Live, which was originally going to be a show on ITV called Giants of Strength, believe it or not.
You actually competed in World's Strongest Man yourself. So what encouraged you to do that?
I mean, the reason I was taken as an equipment guy is because I was a big, strong fellow who was lifting weights. I was a British heavyweight powerlifting champion at the time. And this fellow, his name was Douglas Edmonds. He was actually a pal of my dad's at university. And I was working for him in his milk factory. I was a salesman. I ran the butter room at one point. I was doing everything, all while at university. He was a big, strong fella. And he was actually the head referee of World's Strongest Man. So that's kind of the connection now. I got invited out and lifted it and moved stuff. And, I'll never forget, actually, when I was out there, and that first job that I really loved and I really was excited by, I just worked day and night. I was like an old Egyptian slave, dragging stuff up and down the beach. You couldn't stop me working. And I got recognized at the end of it. A very, very talented TV producer called Charlotte Beagle. And she gave me a hardest working team member award, a little ship in a bottle. I'll never forget how important that was to me. That little thought in my mind always stuck for anyone who worked for me or with us. Make sure you praise them and they'll be loyal to you forever. Charlotte Briegel, I still would do anything for her. She was great. I then realized I was really quite close to the level of being a good strongman. So I started to focus more on it. And luckily, they weren't quite as strong back then as they are now. The pool of people willing to take part was quite slim. And therefore, I got to Britain's Strongest Man, made the final, came second in Scotland, strongest man, managed to go to World's Strongest Man as a reserve, and then injuries happen and you fall into it. But I was never big enough to do it, really. I was a 115 kilo man, which sounds quite big, but it really isn't for strongman. It's really pretty scrawny. So I knew if I wanted to take sport further, I'd have to go find something else. When I got a phone call from the bobsleigh people who'd seen me on BBC doing strongman, they got in touch with me and said, "You shifted with that truck, but I bet you'd shift a lot more if it was a lot lighter. Do you want to come trial?" So I said, yeah. And that's how I got into bobsleigh.
That must have given you a great sense of pride, but it was an opportunity you almost lost through injury. So how did that make you feel, and how did you get back up to strength again?
I had a terrible injury on August 4th, my birthday. So the Olympics were in February coming. It was awful. It was an awful experience, actually, in multiple ways, because when I returned on December 27th, having had my leg pinned and 2 operations, and everyone had assumed I was gone, turned up and they said, "Oh, you come along to cheer us, Bryce, at the trials." I said, yeah, I'm here to cheer you. I mean, I was in such good shape that summer, ready for it. You had 9 pushes and I pushed off the back where I was good, and it didn't go so well. I was like 45 out of 45 in the first push. And then slowly I worked up, and suddenly on the final 9th push, I don't know, maybe the timing system got wrong or something, but I actually was second on the left-hand side, which I never even pushed on before. It was all very odd. I don't know if God smiled on me for a minute or something, but I leapt in and that was it. Off to the Olympics I went. Threatened to be contested in the courts by the guy I kicked out who'd done half a season already. So I had to go back and compete with him again in a special showdown, but it went well. So got an Olympics, which was a bit of a curse in many ways. Certainly then you had no real financial support. I had to sell my apartment and that helped fund me go through it. So it was bittersweet. And I remember my dad put his arm around me as I finished 21st equal out of 46 teams, might I add. So I was in the top half. But he said, "Colin, don't leave yourself without a pot to piss in." This is exactly, you've done it now, son. You've done it. Well done. And it was quite nice because my dad had been so close to making the Olympics on 3 different occasions, but for different reasons, whether it be an external import came in and got naturalized in time and took his place in the athletics team to not throwing well on the AAAs. He had been so close. He was 4th in the Commonwealth Games. And that was a sort of family thing. So it was a great side to it. And I think it felt pretty good for my dad too. I hope so. It wasn't so good for my mum, who'd never really taken that much interest in the whole nonsense. She turned up to Salt Lake City and she saw this roaring bobsleigh go boom by. She went, "You don't do that, do you?" I went, "Yes, Mum, that's what I do." "Oh my God, Colin!" She was like, "What are you doing? You can't get in that." Because you don't realise how big and how much of a roar and how steep the corners are. When something's winging past you at 100 miles an hour on jittery hard ice. Very happy I did it. Very happy I got through the other end and was able to restart a career, because you become very single track and it's not healthy. Especially when there was no financial aid, you just become a sort of desperate man to make it. And actually, there's a certain depression everybody feels afterwards. Real bad, actually, because you sort of start to check your worth. Why have I done this? I was speaking a couple of Olympics later when I was commentating to Matthew Pinson, who said to me, even more powerfully, we were sitting on the bus coming back as 2 BBC pundits together. I think it was Amy Williams who just won a gold, and he said, "Oh, I give it 12 days till the big crash happens." I said, "What do you mean?" He went, "No, she's got a good family. I'll give her 14 days, 2 weeks. He said, "And then she'll fall off the face of the earth." I said, "Really? Well, did you have that problem as well?" I said, "I had that problem." He went, "Oh, well, if you think you had it bad, imagine winning a gold medal. Imagine the high of that to then the crash." I was like, wow, yeah, I guess you're right, actually. I guess. But anyway, career went back on and started doing more and more events. Strongman was really what I threw myself into. That's where I saw the most opportunity, probably stupidly, really, because it was a dangerous time coming into the 07-08 period to even try and get something off the ground that was a new tour. But luckily, I sold it into AEG and a fellow called Charles Garland from 19, Simon Fuller's company. And they bought it. And we kind of plodded on together for a year, building up and setting up. We did one event together in America and it flopped. And then they handed me the keys to everything. So I now was in control of everything. And I had a wonderful looking brand and website and all that kind of good stuff. I knew if I just worked exceptionally hard, actually I'd be better off without them. So off I went.
You mentioned earlier on about Douglas Edmonds, and how hard was it to take over from him and elevate it all to the next level?
Take it to the next level was hard, but very easy to take over because in 2004, the World's Strongest Man was out in the Bahamas and I was there. I was now the MC. And I could see what was brewing. He'd signed up all the athletes. They'd got a lot of Middle Eastern investment money, and they were going to create this new federation. And they used that power to then hold IMG to ransom and World's Strongest Man to ransom. But I mean, instead of asking for X, they asked for 10X from the previous year. So IMG was really in a shocking state of panic just weeks before World's Strongest Man 2005. And the one person they didn't invite or give any kind of a role to in this new federation was myself, who actually had something, I could have given them. I had this tour with Ulf, and they were quite cheeky about Ulf. They didn't really like Ulf. They thought he was I don't know what they thought about him exactly, but I could tell they didn't like him and they didn't respect it not very much. And therefore, there was nothing there for me. And I'm glad, because I didn't really want to turn my back on IMG, who had given me my first role in London, even if it was a post-room boy. And so basically the head man at IMG, I happened to be on a gig for them in Spain doing Superstars. And I was the MC and head rep. And I remember pointing at me when he saw my face, and he just had the meetings the day before, and he went, "Are you part of that new federation? If you are, you can get the fuck off this set right now, Colin Bryce." And I said, no, I'm not. He said, "Have you heard what they've done to me?" I said, "No, I didn't, but I knew deep down what they were going to do to him. I could sense something bad." And he said, "Listen, I'm in big trouble here. Can you find me 25 fat guys who even look the part? We've got 6 weeks to go." And I said, "Yeah, I'll do you a lot better than that, Graham, if you also help me make my tour the qualifying tour of World's Strongest Man." He went, "Done." And that was it, really. So, yeah. So I then had that position gifted to me by the Levers. Thank you, Douglas. So, yeah, that wasn't very nice. And there was certainly a few rather unscrupulous things happened to try and get me to stop doing it. But yeah, I didn't.
Do a lot of live events. Have there been occasions when things haven't gone according to plan?
There's a few things that can go badly wrong. Having technical problems is always bad. And, I remember one year in Wembley, it was incredibly hot in 2019. I mean, unbelievably hot. And there was also happened to be like a super sellout at the stadium next to it. So people just couldn't get there. It was a total disaster. I remember the video starting with no sound. And I just walked out on the microphone. I went, "Stop, turn off the lights. Let's start this again. And I'm going to call out how this is going to happen." Start to play the video and turn the audio up. "Thank you. Everyone have a good day." Thank you. I was like, "Urgh." But I mean, it is what it is. You sometimes you just got to roll with things. Equipment breaks, things happen. But the worst thing is it's actually unforeseen injury, because nothing is more important in so many ways than keeping the guys safe and healthy. We had a bad one last year where a guy snapped both his patella tendons. Sounds horrific, and it was. He ended up in hospital later that night. That was pretty terrifying. That's when you really question whether you've taken every safety measure, putting a strongman contest on that you possibly could have. And I think the answer was yes, because it's inherently dangerous. It's just an inherently dangerous sport. And that's part of the allure. It's a bit like watching a tightrope walker when you can see that he's actually chained to the rope and he's got a big net a foot underneath it. Suddenly it starts to get, it doesn't look quite so impressive, you know what I mean? Oh, and he's only 10 foot off the ground. Someone putting a giant log over their head and it weighs 500 pounds, that's dangerous. Of course it is. Falls on your head, it's going to hurt. And if something goes snap while you're trying to put it up, it's very hard to put all the correct catchers in place to actually stop it crushing you. So those are the kind of problems. Nothing overly amusing, really, just great amounts of stress. If I was to redo education, I would demand that every child not only did business economics as an absolute must, but, if you're going to do things like drama or whatever, should actually hand them the production and say, "Right, take over. And you're going to run everything on the night, not just a little bit of pretend acting. You need to do everything." In my business, you actually have to learn marketing. You have to learn a million different things. PR, you're your own hype. You do most of your own accounting and deal with all the legal sides. And you can see why the Hearns, for example, Barry Hearn and his son Eddie, why these things stay within a family. Because there's a certain amount of specialist knowledge you need to know how to risk so much money to make money out of it. It's a dangerous thing to do. So you really have to learn to embrace the risk and mitigate it at all costs.
Do you think that Lawrence, your son, is going to take over the business from you when it comes down to it?
So what do you want to do when you grow up, kind of thing? And, I think I'd like to, bless him, be like you, Daddy. She was incredibly flattering. But I was always a bit of a hustler. My parents tell a story of me flogging X amount of boxes of chocolate to, outselling everybody else in the Boy Scout, chocolate push drive. About 13, I was trying door-to-door selling, of nightsticks that you lock your car up.
The one I remember is you renting out your balcony.
Yeah, I rented my balcony to my mate. Well, I didn't actually. I rented a cupboard. He lived in a cupboard under the stairs. But then there was another mate who used to mock him, and he suddenly didn't have a place to rent anymore. And I had this little one-bedroom flat in Hammersmith I'd bought, and he was like, "Oh, why?" Suddenly he wasn't laughing at my mate who was only paying 180 quid a month to live in the cupboard. He was like, "Oh, is he moving out at all?" I said, "Listen, mate, you can move on to the balcony if you want. I reckon that's only like 150, 130 a month." And he actually went out and bought a tent ready to do it. Bless him. He thought I was being dead serious. But I wasn't. No, I didn't want someone in my balcony as well as in my cupboard in a little one-bedroom flat. And I think beds and sheds, that's taken it too far.
You clearly know a lot of sportsmen, including Arnold Schwarzenegger. So what lessons have you learned from them that you've applied to your own life and your own business?
Arnold Schwarzenegger, I mean, I know Arnold, even had a little humour with him a couple of times, a couple of little jokes with him. He's good fun. I don't know if I've learned that much from other sports people. I've had mentors. Mentors have been incredibly important. Don't be afraid of asking for help. I think I'm probably of that age now where if someone asked me for help, I would really knuckle down and give them as much free coaching as they wished. When you're trying to fight your way up and find things, you're scared to look like you don't know. Douglas Edmonds taught me everything about entertainment in terms of showmanship and strongman and just little nuances and how to work a crowd up, because I used to MC all through university at his games. I used to go help set them up for him. It might sound a bit hokey and small, but you have 10,000 people in a crowd, then you have a big crowd to entertain for hours. So there's a lot of little tricks and things you learn, putting the not very good thrower out first. The great caber tosser comes out at the end and everyone roars, "Wow, did you see that toss?" So, so many ways telling stories and pageantry that are vital to making people interested. So Douglas taught me a huge amount. Little things like don't ever make a weight actually heavier than it looks. Doing a show on Muscle Beach in LA, and the guy who brought the equipment up brought up 2 lead suitcases. Each one weighed 200 kilograms, and they were literally just suitcase size. And nobody could pick them up. It looked awful. I was filming all these things, and I remember just thinking, you've got to take more control, Colin. You can't let that happen again. But Douglas was a big believer in the illusion of grandeur. He's the guy who invented the car walk, where you strap a VW Beetle, take the engine out, so it's a lot lighter. And some of the framework, actually, it's 450 kilos, which is still pretty heavy. But it looks like 2 tons. Things like keg tossing. Truth is, they're almost empty. They've only got a few inches of sand in them. But everyone sees a beer keg and assumes it's full. And you watch people toss them. It looks great.
Talking about businesses, we are a year into a new government. How do you think it's gone?
I think what is sad is the lack of growth in Britain. Britain desperately needs to buck itself up and get a little bit more productive rather than just cannibalizing itself or criticizing itself all the time. There's a lot we can do very well. Everything from film to television production, for example, something we can be very proud of and should keep boosting and keep pushing. But we really have to be investing a lot more in our sciences, which we're tremendous at, biosciences and all these kind of things. We shouldn't be falling behind Silicon Valley quite so far as we are. And success will bring success. You only have to keep improving everything by 1%. When Dave Brailsford, the guy who took over the Sky cycling team, made every single thing 1% better, from the chain of the bicycle to the helmet, to the hydration of athletes before and after and during the events. Everything was 1% better than actually they could catch that 10% up to all the other teams. And that's exactly what he did. And I think Britain needs to go over everything again and figure out how we can grow. Do I think this government is doing a good job of it? I'm not sure they know who they are. That's the truth. They've got themselves voted in more off the back of a rather split group of Tories, really. They have been pulling each other apart for years now. You say you're a Tory, but then what side are you on? Were you for Brexit? Were you against Brexit? If you wanted to know my politics, I'm a Michael Heseltine kind of right wing. Doing business with Europe and doing business with the world, we want to do business with everybody, and we want to cut red tape. Vital to make the UK an efficient and successful nation. And I think a lot of what we've done to ourselves, it's been done by ourselves. There's not much we can look to anybody else. And I'm not sure this government is really up for changing things dramatically. I don't think we should necessarily mock them for being a little bit pragmatic about how they're changing their tune. In many ways, you have to have pragmatic politicians or you'll keep going down a close that you don't want to go down. And I do think that the less we spend on government, the better in many ways. We should focus on the positive and the growth rather than how we should boost our benefits. Of course, people need looked after, and of course, we must have a system that is fair and just. But the number one thing people should be worried about is how the hell we're going to earn the money first, you know?
And how can the government help businesses like yours?
That's an interesting question. Don't overtax us to the point that you struggle. That's one thing. When you start increasing corporation tax too high, it starts to encourage people to start doing things a little tricky. People start to move offshore and do these kind of moves, you know. It's people like me who are small and medium-sized businesses who just end up getting clobbered because we don't have clever legal departments and clever accounts departments. We're just who we are, and you get hammered from every angle. I actually have a separate branch that does live streaming and things like that. And, you know, I thought for a while, maybe I should, you know, because we were writing software and stuff for live streaming, I probably could go down the route of going for research and development credits. But the very thought of being a small business and having to do all that paperwork and then getting refused and the hassle, and it's just not worth it. Too many other things to think about, going around begging for money. So it's difficult. There's a lot of inequalities, even in, for example, the entertainment world, where if you are high-end television, over £1 million a program, you get fantastic tax credits. But by high-end, that doesn't mean quality. That just means how much you spend. But if you're like me, who doesn't spend £1 million per hour of television, you know, you don't get these. You know, that's like, well, who cooked that one up? You know, that's, why? Why do they and we don't? What? You know what I mean? So it's almost encourages us to sort of fraudulently overspend, you know, and to get all that credit. And please sort out withholding 20% of your entire purse when you rent a stadium until such time as you've proven that you are doing all taxes for foreign people. It is a real hassle. One fundamental change I'd make to Britain, and that needs to happen now, and that is stop being pensionable at 65, because it's killing Britain. People live far too long, and there's no way people of working age can afford to look after these people living to 100, because people are living to 100 a lot more than they were before. Everything else, I think in really positive terms, how we can make success rather than how we can cut back. But that is one cutback I think needs to happen like much quicker. That is currently scheduled. I should be 70 or 72. My mum got it from the age of 60, you know, and I think that's, you know, there she's perfectly healthy at 83, and she could go to 103. She's in rude health. How can you have growth when you have to pay for so many people? When you're perfectly fit and healthy, you can work. Pay in rather than take out.
Would you means test the state pension?
No, never. You got to have. Everyone's got to get. Hell yeah, yeah.
Just older.
Just older. Either that, or again, you'll start to get people being clever and start to do dodgy things. You know, people need to have an incentive to pay in.
And what other issues do you feel the government need to get a grip of that they haven't so far?
I don't want people coming in here illegally. Hell no. But I do not want people to be put off coming to Britain. One of our biggest exports is English. You know, we should be absolutely bringing in everyone as a student to come and learn English in England. And people hopefully will fall in love with the place, all these great minds coming to our universities. You know, the brain drain we were enjoying is now going the other way. You know, people are leaving. I know at least 3 surgeons. I know quite a lot of medical people from sport. A lot of injuries and strongman who have left, who go and make a better life in Australia or America. And that's sad that they could be trained up in Britain and then leave. I think the whole immigration thing is a bit of a red herring, really. We need to respect our relationships with those in Europe. I think we need to get that going massively. If I was in charge, I would be signing deals left, right, and centre, especially right now when it feels like Europe could really do with us. One of my sponsors is having a nightmare with all of the paperwork. It's just a disaster, the whole European thing. It's just such a hassle for him. And he's a small to medium-sized enterprise, a manufacturer, actually, in Britain. It's just really sad that one of his biggest market was hurt so badly. The world should be an open place, not a closed place.
Certainly you're not going to be able to have the growth that you need if you are closing off markets.
100%. 100%. I used to have a business that I sold actually to the sponsor that it made certain types of equipment for gyms, and it wasn't made in Britain. It was made abroad. It was sourced in one place and sent to another place. And Pakistan was where most of it was assembled. And then a lot of it was sold all over Europe, really, and America. And that's where we made our money. But I wouldn't like to be doing that now. It would just be a disaster now. I couldn't imagine the headache involved in all of the importing and exporting. It was already a pain. Paperwork is a necessary evil, but free trade is vital.
You know, and I know that our children will end up having many more jobs than we do and potentially more than one career. Going forward, do you have any political ambitions? Would you change career in order to go into politics at all?
Yes, I probably would do, actually, if I'm dead honest. You know, I'm a natural Tory. Right now, party you thought you were with isn't quite representative of you. I find reform a bit ugly because it's opportunistic. It's also splitting apart the Tories. It's really what's allowed Labour to get in. I don't think Britain is ever really a natural left-leaning country. I think it's a very centre to the right. But I can see Labour staying on for another term after this, even though they're not doing anything particularly well. Blighty's had a couple of blights. And of course, the blight of the pandemic was brutal on us, with Brexit sandwiched between them. So we need to just do a lot of hard work and pay into the system, and everybody will be fine. And everybody who's 65, please work till you're 70 and help us sort it out, because that generation in particular had a really, really good run of it. My dad was a student for 9 years. Why? Because he was getting paid to be a student, basically. He's 82 now, and never has there been a more historic rise in house prices, you know. I think that generation shouldn't be too much moaning. We should just change it like today, make it 70, and everyone should pay in a little bit longer before they have their 25 years of relaxation.
And cruises.
Well, yeah, dime off and cruise. My parents cruise like there's no tomorrow. And quite frankly, both my parents agree that they should have their winter fuel taken off them. But they're not going to give it up unless you take it off them. And I think there's probably a lot of people who think like that, quite frankly. That's something that would need means tested. You know, we don't want old people freezing to death. That would be terrible. How do you, I don't know, how do you do that one, Fiona? I really don't know. But means testing would be so expensive, probably, wouldn't it?
That's the problem with all of these things, though. The amount of bureaucracy that goes in order to find out who should actually get these things and who shouldn't is quite large. So it's a difficult one. Coming back to your political ambitions, what would be your dream job in government?
Prime Minister, definitely. That's what I wrote when I was 5 years old at school.
Really?
Yeah, I did, actually, yeah. Well, when I was 6, sorry. In America, I moved to America that year, and they asked me what I wanted to be, and I said, Prime Minister. What's that? Just to fulfill that. No, I don't know. No, I'm joking. Well, in a wonderful fantasy world, I wouldn't mind being a local MP. I don't think I'd want to be anything to do with any senior politics, really, because that's something that probably needs lifelong politicians who truly study the arts more of how all of that works. I'm not sure I could get up to speed quick enough, but I wouldn't mind certainly helping my local community, even just getting involved in the local council or whatever. I think it would be quite fun to do. I think it would add a lot of worth to life. Just chasing private enterprise can leave you a little lacking. I think at some point, if you can do something for other people, that's why I would want to do it, not just to have power or whatever else people might become lifelong politicians for. I think it would be fun just to do a term in council or in any role, really.
Politics has changed quite a lot with the rise of social media. So do you think that's influenced the political agenda?
I think it can be a very negative influence, actually. What I don't like is, if I click on a right-leaning video and then suddenly you'll get shot down a rabbit hole of being served up what you to keep watching in whatever system you're watching these videos in. That's not a good thing. You start to see a very perverted view of the world from only what is being served to you. You have to be very careful with social media and politics, I think. I feel like I come across people who have a very unbalanced view of the world at the moment. Social media is good in many things. My business wouldn't exist. The media you would have to buy and the coverage you have to buy to sell out arenas is just so colossal back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. But social media made it so much easier for small boats to rise. For that, it's been amazing. We're a qualifying tour for World's Strongest Man, and I think we've got 5.2 million people who follow us on Facebook. It's just bizarre, it's just superb. People would have laughed at me if I'd have said this kind of thing could happen for Strongman 30 years ago. I always had a belief that people would be interested in something that was so fundamental to human nature. How could it not be? People are interested in who's the fastest, who's the most beautiful, who's the strongest. It's simple. And social media has really helped that kind of thing. But it also, along with indulging in things, it also takes you down strange routes. I think it's also made us all a lot more aware of quite how powerful media and those who run the media are. And I think it's something that always needs checked.
Do you think we encourage the understanding of politics enough on our young people? Have you started talking to your two about politics an awful lot yet?
So my two are 15 and 14, and they tend to ask me questions, but they're also half Colombian, so they're also very interested in Colombia as well. Talk about media giving a place a bad rep. It's one of the greatest countries in the world, and they really love it when they go there, and they love the country very much. Politics is something we do discuss, but maybe not as much as we should do, because I'm working most of the time.
And what do you think the world will look like in 5 years' time?
I think it's going to come right. There certainly feels like there's been a rise of nationalistic views coming to the fore. That certainly hasn't been helped by Mr. Putin in Russia. Mr. Trump has taken it a little too far. Make America great again certainly hasn't been pushing the America that I grew up there for 7 years. America was never quite such a boastful place as it is now, and or divided. And I hope it will find itself again. Not everything's about self-success, as it were, and it feels a lot of different countries are obsessed with. AI is going to be fascinating. I use AI all the time now. I think it's the most incredible thing. ChatGPT, my God, this is outrageous. I do think it'll change the way education will happen. To be honest, education totally needs reformed anyway. Why kids still have a 10-week, 12-week summer holiday when it really, that kind of thing was so kids could go off and join the farm or whatever. And my son's at 15, he's already keen to do work, and he's out hustling away and buying and selling things on Gumtree and all different things. He's a bit of a natural born hustler. I think a lot of things could be improved and tweaked, but in 5 years' time, I think Britain will still be a successful nation, and hopefully we won't have pulled ourselves apart. Yeah, and America too, and any of our other friends. And let's hope Russia's wickednesses will be reversed, because they have to be.
What gives you the most hope for the next generation?
I was thinking about this earlier today, actually. For every generation as they get older, the music's not as good, or someone else is playing music, it's too loud. We didn't do this, things like that in our gen. Yes, we did. Cycles repeat. And seeing enthusiastic excitement for the hustle from my son, for example, who started a YouTube channel, and looking at my kids, I think there's much to look forward to. I've got nothing in particular that I wish to see achieved, because I think actually chasing exact dreams is a fool's game. I'd like just to see the world a happy, better place, and me to be enjoying any role in it where everyone's coming from a better community situation. Having a family is a most magnificent thing. And if anyone's listening to this and they're obsessed with making money or obsessed with making the Olympics or sport or whatever, do what you got to do, but rid yourself of that as quickly as possible, because it's not healthy. It really isn't. Ambitions are great, but don't let ambition be a killer, because I actually think it killed my brother. So there you go. Be careful.
On that note, I wish to dedicate this particular podcast to Andrew, Colin's brother, my cousin. He unfortunately died 16 years ago this year and will always be sorely missed by all the family. Colin, it's been great to hear your story and how open you've been regarding what's going on in your world. So thank you to the listeners for the podcast. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment. If you think it's worth coming back, please like and subscribe. If you feel you need something to tide you over to the next podcast, please buy my book Party Games on Amazon. And on that note, I'll see you next time. Have a good week, one and all.